I see we have a great group here. Thank you all for joining us. We're glad to see you. Um, just so you know what you got yourself into, this is our monthly Agape training. We do one every month, the first Thursday of every month, different topics. And tonight we're going to talk about extreme behaviors, specifically lying. Why lying is such a big trigger for us as parents, and maybe some background as to the reasons why our children from hard places might have this skill of lying. So we have two great facilitators here, Ellen and Danielle, who I'm going to let them introduce themselves in a minute. They're going to present some information, some perspective, and then at the end we'll have a time of question and answers with them. So if you have a specific question, maybe just write it down, or you can write it in the chat and we'll get to it at the end. We'll be ending at 8:30 and we'll honor your time with that, although I'm sure all of us could talk about this topic for a long time. Just a couple of kind of ground rules, just a reminder that although this is a presentation, there will be time for you to kind of speak about your own situation at the end. And so we just want to honor people's stories and keep whatever is said here confidential as a part of this group. And also just a reminder to, have an open heart, have an open mind in terms of what the presenters are going to say. We know this is a super triggering topic for us as parents. And so I just encourage you to keep an open heart and open mind. All right, so with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Danielle and Ellen to introduce themselves. Thanks for being here, everybody.
Hi, I'm going to let Ellen go first, just because she has an official name on her thing.
That was tricky. Hi, everyone. I'm Ellen Early. I'm a family support specialist from the Central New York region. I'm also an adult adoptee. I was adopted from the foster care system when I was about 4.5 months old. I'm also a biological mother to 3 kids and a kinship parent to my grandson, who will be 7 next week. And I've been raising him on my own since I was 2. I mean, since he was 2. Well, maybe I was 2. He was 2.
Since you were 2, Ellen, how did you figure that out?
Young. I was young. I'm good at this. I'll pass it to you, Danielle.
Hi, I'm Danielle Skelly, and I am a family support specialist on Long Island. Even though I'm not on Long Island, I service the Long Island area. And I am the adoptive mom of 6, who range from 33 to 9, and the biological mom of 4. And I've been doing this adoption stuff, foster care stuff for like almost 20 years. So I've been lied to a lot. And I've learned a lot about lying in 20 years. So hopefully we can give you some insight and some help.
Danielle. Okay, so I guess I wanted to start off with a couple of things. So just to be clear, when I'm speaking about lying or storytelling or fantasy, I'm not making a judgment about it. Personally, I don't necessarily classify it as a bad thing. I don't see it as a moral failing when we're talking about kids who lie. I see it kind of as a neutral growth and learning experience. And many times it's something they've learned from us as their parents. And for our kids in particular, most of the time, it's either like a trauma response or a survival skill. So I think it's important to really reframe how we think about lying, storytelling, and fantasy with our kids. The other thing I wanted to share just quickly is that when I'm talking, I'm speaking, I'll use the term birth mother and birth family, and I want to be inclusive. And I know that there are preferred terms to use when speaking about biological family, like first family, family of origin, impacted parents. But for the purpose of me not stumbling and going off onto some weird tangent, I am most comfortable saying birth mother and birth family, and I apologize in advance if that's offensive, but I do want to bring to the table that language is super important around that. So with that, I just kind of wanted to go into just a little brief history about adoption. Just because I think it's important to have, I like history and I think it's important to have a history. So we as a society have really romanticized adoption. It's depicted in television and movies and stage shows and operas and ballets and podcasts and books and coffee klatches across America. And it's a beautiful way. It can be a really beautiful way to form a family, I think. Obviously, it's the way my family was formed, and I appreciate that. So years ago, the common story was generally a young unmarried woman who found herself pregnant and didn't want to bring shame to her family with an unexpected pregnancy, would be whisked away to some home where she could give birth and then give the baby to a family who would be better suited to raise the child. And then a married couple who may or may not be able to have biological children would adopt that child, and no one would need be the wiser. And there was a sense of noble sacrifice on both sides of that story. You know, the birth mother being very noble in giving her child to this family who was very noble in accepting that child. And it was also best for the child because then the child wouldn't grow up with the stigma and shame of being labeled as a bastard in that time. And best of all, no one had to know. No one had to know that the young girl was pregnant because she'd be sent away to have the baby. She'd come back. No one was the wiser. Nobody would talk about it again. And it was like it didn't happen. And the family who adopted the baby was also encouraged not to tell anyone. And social workers of the time were very careful to place babies who looked like the adopted parents, who were coming from the same religious and socioeconomic background as the birth family, and it was seamless. And the baby could grow up never even knowing they were adopted. And that was the standard. So then we moved on to a time where transracial adoptions became popular, particularly adoptions from Korea, like after the war, and then China with the one-child policy, and Africa with the famine, and Russia with the failure of communism. And the days of the secret adoptions were basically over because those kids didn't look like their families. So then as a society, we changed our point of view to think of adoption as saving a child. And the adoptive parents were looked upon as heroes, and they could wear that badge in public because they saved this child from growing up in whichever country was hated at the time. And their birth parent obviously gave their child up willingly and without regrets, because who wouldn't want their child to grow up in the land of plenty? And then we came to the era of drug addicts and prostitutes and children, particularly of color, being forcibly removed from their parents who were experiencing poverty, mental health issues, and substance use. Removing children from their homes and their communities and their culture and their families because that was what was in the best interest of the child. And so then society encouraged adoptive parents to take those children to give them a better life. And there was no need for them to stay connected to the birth family, because after all, the birth family was criminal by nature, and by taking the children away from them, the children then stood a chance of not being criminal and drug addicted and mentally unstable. So that brings us to today, where we understand so much more about what is truly in the best interest of the child. We have almost 100 years of social experiment to draw from now. And strangely enough, and I think this part was kind of interesting, that adoptions prior to 100 years ago, prior to the government regulation, were very open and accepted because it just made sense in the time for a family who had a child they couldn't afford, or a woman who found herself pregnant outside of marriage, to send the baby away to a family who had the means to care for that baby. And there was no lying about it. The child usually went to a family that they were sometimes related to, sometimes not, where they would grow up learning the adopted family's trade. Sorry, my dog is having a moment. But those weren't regulated adoptions, obviously, and many times the abuses that the children were suffering at the hands of the adoptive family were extreme. And the major perk of that sort of adoption was the child labor aspect, which was a perk basically for the adoptive family. So today we know that children need the support of their adoptive parents, as well as a connection to their biological family, regardless of the status of that biological family. We know that love is not enough to heal a child who comes from a hard place. We know that adoption is trauma. We know that helping a child stay connected to their culture is critical for their well-being. And we know how that first disconnection from a birth parent impacts the brain of the child and what we can do to help heal that brain. So given that brief history of the timeline of adoption and where does the lying piece fit into that? We know that in the early days of that state-sanctioned adoption, every effort was made to promote the lie that the child was the biological offspring of the adoptive parents. Eventually, that common practice, as handed down by the professionals, was to tell the child that they were adopted, not dwell on that fact, and for the adoptive parents to create a fantasy where the birth mother loved the child so much that she gave them up to have a better life. Meanwhile, the adoptive parents chose the child to be their own, and how lucky that child was. And that's my story. That was the era that I was adopted into. I knew I was adopted. I was told from the earliest time I can remember. And I'll never forget, my grandmother was always, she constantly was telling me how lucky I was. And like, I really had no idea what she meant, because I had like a lot going wrong and I really didn't feel lucky, but I knew I was supposed to act like I was lucky. So the child was pulled into a world of lies that the adults supported, where love meant sacrifice, and the child was the lucky sacrifice who was regarded as ungrateful if they ever expressed anything other than happiness and contentment about their situation. So the child learned early on that they needed to become part of the lie or suffer the consequences. Like what consequences? It would be the anger of their parents, the rejection of their community, the labeling as difficult by their school, and the punishment of their church. So that's what I got on the history, Danielle. I'm going to pass it back to you.
Okay, because I don't have nearly as much organization as Ellen. I'm going to just show a really short clip to segue from the history and this idea of sanctioned lying and sort of how we encourage our kids to lie in some ways, and then kind of discuss how we kind of move from there and some of those big feelings. So give me a minute, because I'm going to share this TikTok that Ellen found that I was actually familiar with, because I think it could be really helpful.
Hello. Oh, you know what? Sorry, I can't talk right now. I'm right in the middle of a meeting. No, I'm not. I'm taking a nap. I'm so sorry we're late today. My daughter had a dentist appointment. No, she didn't. We overslept. Oh, I'm so sorry. We won't be able to make it. We have family in town. No, we don't. I don't want to go. I called in sick today. No, I didn't. I'm on a field trip. He hit me. Sweetie, no, he did not. I just saw the whole thing. Why are you lying? I'm not lying. He hit me. This is not okay. We're going to have to really work on this lying thing. In our family, we don't lie. A lot of adults get really activated when their kids lie, but we don't realize that we teach them lying on a daily basis. Just notice all the ways that you teach your child to lie on a daily basis and follow along for another way to respond.
So that's sort of the extension of how Ellen started, of this idea that we condition our kids to lie, right? From adoption, but then in our actions. We often tell these white lies, we don't acknowledge them as lies, and our kids are watching. And the one thing I know about kids who come from hard places, kids who have come to families by adoption, they are the best people watchers that exist. So if you wiggle, they are going to see it. Even if it's just your little toe inside your shoe, they know it's happening. So if you're going to make these lies in your daily life, they are going to observe it and then justify their behavior because they're doing exactly what you're doing. In parenting, our most powerful tool is modeling. And as that example showed, what we're modeling is not telling the truth. They're harmless lies is how we justify it, but lies just the same. I think it's really, really important when we talk about this to think about, for us, why is lying such a trigger? Why do we get so hung up on the truth when we already know it, right? 99% of the time, we're asking our kids something that we already know the answer to. Why did you eat that cookie? Why did you cut class? We know the answer. I don't know why we're asking a question that we already know the answer to. We're setting them up to lie. We are putting them in a position to lie. And often it's because they lie to preserve their relationship with us. And for those of you who've been following us and have done reframing, we tout connection before correction, right? That the healing of this trauma that these kids experience happens in that relationship. And our kids, by lying, are trying to preserve their relationship because they see the truth as the acts that is going to be the reason why you don't love them anymore. Because they're sure that at some point they're going to do something so egregious that's going to make you stop loving them. They know that because that's what their history has told them. So as parents, we need to reflect on, why do we find lying so like cuts me to your core? And it used to. I was the parent early on that'd be like, tell me the truth. You're not getting anything until you tell me the truth. And I was hung up on the truth. And 99% of the time it was because my brain was already like, they're lying to me. They are going to be the next criminal mastermind, the next Bernie Madoff. I was parenting the next Bernie Madoff, and I was going to stop world destruction and getting my kid to tell the truth. Really, if I was honest, that's where my head was. It had nothing to do with whatever they lied about, not handing in their homework. I was convinced that that lie was going to turn into, they were going to be the next great criminal mastermind, because if they didn't tell me the truth, they were manipulating me, they were trying to get away with something, they were dishonest, all the things that I thought people who are bad human beings were. And I was not going to raise a human being that was going to be dishonest and lie. So I need to recognize that that was my stuff. That had absolutely nothing to do with it. And the reality is because my kid snuck a cookie or cut class or didn't tell me the truth has no bearing on where they're going to be as an adult, because they're 3, 5, 7, 16. My 16-year-old lies to me about where they are. They are not, the likelihood of them turning into the next great mastermind is still very, very small. The percentage of serial killers out of the general population is very small, and the chances your child who lies will not turn into them. But instantly my head goes there. What if she would have died? What if this happened if I didn't know where you were? So we really need to be mindful of, what are we responding to? Are we responding to the situation that we're dealing with? Or are we responding to our awfulization of the situation? Are we responding to where our head goes because of our own fears, because of our own insecurities? And I think that's hugely important. And as when parents, we take the minute just to go, this is ridiculous. They ate a candy bar. It's not that big of a deal. And not look at them as, I'm going to be sitting at your arraignment because you stole 5 cars, because you're the greatest jewelry thief that ever walked the face of the earth. Well, our response will be very different. I also think we have to ask the right questions. If you already know the answer, why are you asking, did you do this? What point are you trying to prove? What are you trying to get to in that moment? How about just, and I've really taken to just saying, I know this to be true, and we're going to move on from it. Because I think that's much more powerful than asking them to tell you the truth. In the conversation, in the relationship that you develop about what you know to be true. Why did you feel that way? As parents, our job is to, lying is a behavior. Every behavior is an expression of a feeling, fear, and need. Our job is to figure out what that is, not to uncover, to be the great lie detector. It's really, really about meeting the need that's behind the lie. And we so often get hung up in the lie. And that's hard, because I can tell you, I know what my parents would have done when I was caught lying. I spent a lot of time grounded for lying. A lot of time grounded for lying. So I think being mindful of why we feel so strongly about this, and then to tie it into what Ellen said, our kids in some way, so many ways are, their world is sort of foundationally perpetuated, started with a lie. They should be grateful, even when things are not going well. For me, I'm not grateful that my job is crappy, if my job is crappy, nor should I be acting like I'm grateful. But somehow, if I didn't behave that way, if the adoptee doesn't act grateful because they were given this great gift, then they're ungrateful, then they're bad. And again, when we create the shame in these kids, they believe that that could potentially be the axe that severs the relationship forever, that sends them out hurling into outer space, not grounded to any parent or planet or connection, because they know to be true, they will do something that will sever that relationship. Does that make sense to everybody? Right? It doesn't change in the moment, right? It doesn't change sort of how we deal with it in the moment, how it feels for us in the moment. And I know for me, I get an interest. I have to just remember what I'm talking about, and it's on my other computer. Sorry, y'all. I know for me in the moment, I instantly get angry. Anger is what prompts me. It's where it comes from. I don't even know how to sort of manage that. It becomes completely overwhelming for me. So I think for me, I have to stay grounded in that moment. I have to do something to pause and not get hung up on the lie and remember why the feeling feels that way. When we give our kid, I forgot about consequences and punishments, right? So are we punishing and consequencing because of the lie? What again, I go back to, what are we expecting from our kids when we ask them to tell us the truth? What validation does that give to us? Is that the matter of, because then we prove that we're right? Well, I'm just gonna let y'all know right now, I'm letting y'all off the hook. I'm letting all your kids off the hook. When you catch your kids in a lie, you are right. You know it, you're right already. You don't have to get them to say it out loud to prove that you're right. I promise you that, because you are right. So start with the premise of you are right. You caught them, you're right. Move on to that. So now that I know that I'm right, can I be kind? Where's the kindness in this thing? Where's the connection? Where's the relationship? How am I salvaging this potential sever in our relationship? How am I building upon this rather than creating a deeper divide? And our typical reaction creates a deeper divide. I don't want to talk to you. You're a liar. Bad people lie. Sometimes we explain to them who liars are. Do you know people who lie? And then we'll tell them about all the awful people we know who lie and what are the consequences of their choices. And then we equate them to those people who we don't like. So the messaging we were giving our kids is, we don't like you because you're a liar. Just like all those other people that I just told you about. I don't like liars, and therefore I don't like you. That is absolutely not a kind, connected approach to our children. So I'm gonna show another video because I think it's a really good representation, and we'll talk about it, about how to connectedly approach our kids with a lie, because these videos are way better than I could ever be at it. So hang on one second.
Did you hit that child over there? I saw you hit that child. Did you clean your room? I just saw your room. It is not clean yet. Let's come do it together. Did you wash your hands? I was right out there and you didn't wash your hands. No problem. Do you want to do it together? I can make a smiley face with the soap.
So I will qualify, she's one of my favorite TikTokers. I look for her videos because she's so simple and so explains all of these connected parenting techniques way better than I could ever do it. But I think that's a really, really good representation where she shifts from being accusatory to connected. Same point. She makes it very, very clear that whatever happened, happened. She doesn't ask them to validate it, and then finds a way to connect with them through that. So then the fear and the hesitation to tell you the truth the next time is taken out of it, because your reaction was positive. You created a connected experience. You solidified the relationship through that rather than severing the relationship. So I think that's a huge difference in this, is that when we accuse, when we ask questions, when we berate to get the truth, we are severing the relationship. That's about us needing to be right. You can remember forever and ever, amen. Danielle tells you, you are right. When you catch them doing something wrong, I promise you, you're right. You don't have to prove it. Then all you got to think about is, how am I going to be kind in this interaction? And it doesn't have to be in the moment. You can take a pause if you are so overwhelmed with anger, because that's for me, right? Lying builds up for me a natural anger reaction. I am pissed off about it. I hate being lied to. It irks my nerve. And I typically cannot be connected in that moment. So guess what? I don't have to deal with it in that moment. I know it to be true. I can calm myself. I can regulate myself. I can do what I need to do. And then I can rejoin the interaction and say, hey, let's talk about that when I'm prepared to do it. We have this need as parents often to address it in the moment. It doesn't matter. The more important piece is that we address it in a connected, relationship building manner rather than a shaming, disconnected, relationship severing manner. I hope that was helpful. I think I didn't talk long enough. So
I thought it was helpful. I liked what you were saying, Danielle. And I wanted to go back to, I always have said that same thing about, the percentage of serial killers in this world is so small. Like, right. It's highly unlikely that you're going to be raising a serial killer. But here's the thing. What if you are? What if you are raising that kid that stole the car 5 times and you're sitting at his, sentencing hearing? Can you still love that child? Because when I'm looking at it from the adoptee perspective, the love that we know is very conditional. So we don't have the luxury of being born and then having that security of unconditional love, right? We're born and we're immediately told, we don't love you enough to keep you. So you're going to go to this other family. And that other family is saying, we love you just enough to take you, right? That's complicated. It's a complicated feeling for an adoptee to not have that unconditional love. So what if you are raising the kid that grows up to lie a lot more than you lie, or that you feel comfortable having, a child walking around representing your family out in the world and being a liar? Can you still love that child? Because isn't that what we're tasked to do, is to love these children unconditionally, without condition? And the fact that your kid, in general, I can't speak for all adoptees, obviously, but to know that your kid at one point was not loved or didn't have the luxury of knowing unconditional love from the beginning. So I don't know. I liked that piece of that, Danielle, because I say it all the time. There's a very slim chance that I'm raising a true criminal. But if I am, I'm still going to love that kid regardless.
So ironically, I have a very close friend who raised someone who murdered somebody, who in a very public way on the news, y'all have read the article, is currently incarcerating child on murder. And she still loves him. She still sends him letters. She still talks to him. So our actions as adoptive parents, because as many times as we say we'll love you forever, we have to show that every time. And we need to remember, and this I think is what helps me often, is I have to remember that my kid is waiting for me to do it wrong. They're waiting for me to screw it up. They're waiting for my love to be conditional. So I have to, at every interaction, make sure that I love them wholly and fully, that they know it in my actions, not in my words, that no matter what they do, I'm going to love them through it. And that's hard. That's hard when we want to be right. It's hard when we feel violated, when we feel wronged by their lie. You know, if your kid steals from you or does something that is personal for you in some way or another, breaks your things, takes something from you. It's very hard to think about how I'm going to be kind in that moment. But your choices in that moment are life altering for your kid. And remembering that every interaction matters, as small or big, they all matter. So we need to show all the time through our actions that we are connected and engaged and love them unconditionally. And I think if you can't do that in the moment, it is really okay not to. It's really okay to take a deep breath and regulate yourself, and reflect on what's the best way for me to be connected in this moment. Because so often our reaction is from our own feelings, strong feelings about whatever the situation is. And I think because Ellen gave us that amazing history on adoption, this idea that we as a society have more open adoptions, right? So we often have a lot more information about our kids' birth family. For example, my two youngest, I raised their moms for periods of time. And I know the trials and tribulations and the choices that their moms made. And some of them are not great and they have their life struggles right now. And often for me, when my kids lie or have a behavior that is deceitful, I instantly think about all the challenges their parents have, and that's where they're going to end up. Right? I'm reacting to how am I going to make sure my kid doesn't end up here or there or whatever. And I honestly think because of their deceitful behavior, because of their lie, they're destined to be just like their birth mother. That has nothing to do with it. The reality is my kids' birth parents often are in situations that they're in because they weren't loved unconditionally. They came to me as teenagers after being rejected time and time and time again, and not given an opportunity to heal from their trauma. So what I know is, how do I prevent it from that happening to my kids? Is I love them through it. I don't make my love conditional. I don't worry about where they might end up, and I worry about what they need from me in that moment. Because that's how I assure that they don't have the same challenges, or I'm more likely to assure that they don't have the same challenges. But it is hard when I'm looking at my child's face and I'm seeing their mother in everything that they do and all those behaviors, and not have a visceral reaction, not respond in a way from fear, because ultimately that's my fear, right? That is me afraid that I'm going to fail this child and I'm not going to make a change that I vowed to make when I was asked to support them in their lives. That's my fear. That has nothing to do with anything other than me imposing my fear and worry on that child's behavior. And that is not going to help improve the behavior. It more than likely will make them less likely to tell me the truth because they're going to be afraid of my reaction. So it's really going to perpetuate the lying to me because I'm not going to show them that I'm someone that's safe to be truthful to. I want to be someone that's safe to be truthful to, that no matter what they share with me, we're going to handle it together. Now we're going to figure this out together. We're going to come to a solution together. You know, if a child steals a cookie because they really want a cookie, all right, well then we're going to give you your own cookie jar. We can come up with a solution rather than penalizing them for it. And I think that is hugely important. And I think of lying sometimes as like some of the easiest things we can deal with as parents, but we make it the hardest because you caught them, you know the truth. There's no detective work, there's no nothing. So easy to move past it. We don't have to get hung up on it. It's the perfect opportunity, connection, and to put money in the bank. All right, that was a challenge. How do we move past that? What can I do to help you in that moment? Not what can I do to punish you, but what can I do to help you so that doesn't occur again? So you don't feel the need to do that again. And that's just a really, really different perspective and approach to how we look at the lying. So am I responding out of my fear for what might happen, or am I responding to meet your need that caused that behavior? All right, tag Ellen, you're next.
Thanks, Danielle. That's really good. And I think too, I know when I think back to my own parenting and the way that my kids lied and my reaction to their lying, it was coming from a place of fear. It still does when I have that immediate reaction of, because I think you're in a similar situation with that kinship. You know the parents, you know their struggle, and all you want is for their children to avoid that struggle.
Yep.
It is what it is. But I think it's also that lying piece that you're right. It's so easy, but we get so stuck on it. But isn't that what society tells us? Like, okay, you're the parent. You have to make sure that they're fed, they're clothed, that they go to school and that they don't lie.
They have a good moral compass. You are
Yes.
responsible for their moral compass. And lying is a direct contradiction to having a good moral compass.
That's right. It's the downfall of society. And whether or not that's, something that's blown out of proportion, when we, as try to parent therapeutically and do things differently, and we get this sense of shame because we're not doing it the way society expects us to do it, or our families expect us to do it. So then we're feeling ashamed and we're feeling insecure about how to do this differently for this particular child, because we're parenting the child we have, not the child that we think we have or that we thought we were going to have.
Yeah.
So, and the
I
authenticity.
have that challenge a lot at school with my youngest one, because she's a big denier, right? Even when she's caught with her hand in the cookie jar, there's a lot of denial. And the school will then want me to do something about it. And I'm like, okay, so we know this happened. Now, what are we going to do to prevent it? Right?
Mhm.
Well, she needs to have restitution. And I said, well, I can assure you that that's not going to happen. So let's move on. Let's move on. And then I think they think I'm being dismissive. And I guess I've been doing this long enough that I actually don't really care anymore what you think of me. For a long time, I worried about it. And now I'm like, yep, I am raising a house full of heathen liars. They're all just, they are indulging in every 7 deadly sin, each and every one of them every day. We're just a bunch of heathens in this house. So I think at some point we have to get past our own stuff, right? About that. And why is that so difficult for us, And that's a really powerful, I think, parenting moment when my kid knows even when they're wrong, I have their back. Doesn't mean I'm saying it's okay for what they did, but I'm going to help you find a solution so you don't need to do that again. I don't want you to do that again. That's not okay. But I'm not going to ask you to fix it alone, because I'm going to help you fix it with you.
Yeah. And I think that's it. And that's extremely powerful, because that's exactly what our kids need, is to know that they make mistakes for sure. But no matter, even though we don't like the behavior, we still like them. We still love them. We're still going to have their back.
Yeah.
And that's that unconditional piece. That's where that trust is coming in. Yeah, I agree. And I think the other piece to it too was, you had mentioned how particularly adopted kids or kids from hard places, they can read a person better than anybody. And so we know that if our parent is not being authentic with us, so being able to step away, take that breath, not freak out, not have that reaction, come to a place where internally I am ready to deal with whatever the crisis or situation is. Because if I'm not authentic with my kid knows it. I mean, I'm just driving along and my kid looks at me and it's like, why are you mad? And I'm thinking, I'm not mad. I was just thinking about where we're going. Like, do I have to take this exit or that exit? And that's how they're reading the situation that's coming.
Why are you breathing like that? Like, I didn't know I was breathing in a way that you found worrisome.
But it's true, and it affects them. And like, that's such a hard concept. So, and I know so I guess going back to being the parent and why do we lie? And I think, a lot of times it's out of love, and we want what's best for our child, and we don't want them to be hurt or harmed by information that might be hard for them to hear.
Yeah.
And, I know, like with my parents, they created a beautiful fantasy where there was a woman out there somewhere who loved me so much that, she gave me away. And that was, that was the beautiful picture that they painted for me. It didn't really make sense to me, but at the same time, I couldn't question it, because to question it would be questioning their lie, and they weren't liars. And so therefore I should not be a liar. So I couldn't question this fantasy that they created for me.
Yeah.
There was another story that sometimes more recently I think I've heard, is that the birth parents were just so far removed from being able to function that the children were taken and placed. And adoptive parents will tell that to the child, hoping that the child will then just understand that they don't have to love or miss the birth parents, because they're not worth loving or missing. And they don't have to worry about having any pain around their adoption, because now they're okay now. Before they weren't okay before, and they wouldn't have been if they had stayed with their birth parent. Now they're okay. And again, that's that's not a complete truth.
And there's a narrative that I hear parents often say, that just makes my skin crawl on so many levels, is your birth mom loved you so much that she gave you away. And then we proceed to say to them, we love you more than anything in the world. We would never do anything. You're the most important thing to me. So basically we're saying we love you so much that someday we'll give you away. Because if
Right.
your birth mother loved you so much that she gave you away, she made the best choice for you.
Mhm.
And that narrative, it can't be true. It can't be true, right? It's so counter the reality that they're living in. And I don't presume to speak for adoptees, but just one of those ones that I hear that I'm like, let me say that to you and see how that feels right now.
It doesn't make sense. And we're as adoptees, we're asked, forced, expected to just make it make sense in our head. So, we're pushed into this fantasy world of somebody loved you so much that they gave you away, and we love you so much that we're going to keep you, and don't question that.
Right.
Because if that's the case, then, if like my mother was not adopted, well, then why wasn't she? Because didn't your mother love you enough to give you away? Because mine did. So, I mean, it doesn't, how do we, especially a kid, how does that make sense to a kid? It just,
Yeah.
it's like, and then we lie, right? So then there we are as little kids, pushed into this lie, told these fantasies, and then we start lying about things, and then we're punished for it.
Yeah.
Which is just more confusion.
Right. We're fed and again, I don't mean to presume, but I guess they're fed a false, adoptees are fed a false narrative. But then when they create a false narrative that suits them, it's not okay. It's okay when it's their parents' false narrative, but it's not okay when it's my false narrative about hitting my brother or, not handing in my homework. It's only good when it services the adults and not when it services the child.
Right. And having to grow up in this, whatever, because unless you're there and you are experiencing the truth, you are not there to experience the truth.
Mhm.
So you don't have that feeling of trust, that experience. I mean, we as kids, we can tell our kids, you're safe, you're loved, you're here forever, you're not going anywhere. And our kids can process that, and they can go, okay, yeah, I get it. I'm safe. I know nobody here is going to hurt me. I know that I'm here forever. Like, they know it, but that doesn't mean that they feel it. That's not the
That's
connection.
that felt safety idea, right? That's like
Exactly.
this crazy, not crazy idea, but it's just that concept that's still hard for me to understand. I feel like I understand it, but this idea of you are safe, but I have to recognize that it doesn't matter how much I say it, how much I keep them safe, they have to experience it as safety.
Right. Yep.
And that my actions could potentially not be creating a world where they experience safety.
Right. And they're experiencing, so much beyond that it's hard to even, and there's so much that it goes left unsaid. Like we've been talking about grief and the ongoing grief that a child feels that doesn't get talked about. And even if it does get talked about intellectually, even if you can talk to your child about those feelings, it doesn't mean your child is going to feel safe or trust you enough to talk about those big feelings.
Yeah.
And parents, the other thing too, I think too, is parents will push your kid to tell the truth, even though that they haven't been truthful themselves. And that one is that's a hard one to swallow.
Yeah.
And I think kids in particular, they're, when they are lying, it's a lot of times it's to protect the feelings of their parents as well as to protect themselves. Yes, they don't want to feel bad. They don't want to feel the shame. They don't want to get plucked out of this family as well.
Right.
But there's also a sense like, okay, we don't really have that unconditional love basis. So the best I can do is protect my parents' feelings. So we become those caretakers of our parents' feelings.
Yeah. That's that people pleaser thing that we were talking about, right?
Yeah.
That, that sort of need that I don't want you to feel disappointed in me. I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable. So I'm going to tell you the narrative that makes it seem better.
Sure, exactly. We know how those feelings feel. We feel them continuously and constantly. We don't want somebody that we love to feel that way. So we're going to try and make it. That's our responsibility. That's what we do.
Well, you should be grateful. You were brought here to make everyone happy.
Exactly. Maybe a little of our luck will rub off on you and then you'll have a better life. The small lies though, like the one that I hear a lot is like did you brush your teeth? And like, yeah, I brushed my teeth. And like, why are they going to lie about that? It doesn't make any sense. Like the kid's lazy or disrespectful, ungrateful, bad, mean.
They know how much I spend in dental insurance and to get those braces on your teeth and all these things. I had one parent say, do you know how much I spent to get her teeth straight? And she won't even brush them. I'm like, she doesn't care how much you spent to get her teeth straight.
Exactly.
Just in case you're wondering. I am 100% sure did not cross her mind. And you bringing that up actually makes her feel worse. Just to give you an FYI. And she will lie again.
Yep. Yeah, I think, well, that's it, right? They're not lying at you. They're not lying to get to you or get at you or, to make you mad.
Of course they are. The world revolves around me. I'm the adoptive parent. Everything is about me.
No. Oh, if only. But
I don't believe that, everyone. That was sarcastic. Sorry.
So, but telling somebody what they want to hear. I mean, we do it as adults all the time, right? I mean, and so our kids see that. And you're right, our super absorbent sponge-like kids see that, and
everything.
That's what they do. They want to, and when they hang on to that lie, like you can go get the toothbrush and be like, this toothbrush is dry, your breath stinks, you still have like chocolate in your teeth, why are you lying? And they're going to stand there and look you in the eye and say, I brushed my teeth. They're going to hang on to it with both hands because, if they're telling you what you want to hear and you come back with this like unanticipated reaction or like they didn't expect that reaction from you of this anger, because all they thought is, oh, mom wants me to have brushed my teeth. Okay, I have brushed my teeth. And you come back pissed about it. They're going to be like, no. Stop being angry because I brushed my teeth. And you're standing there going, no, you didn't. And they're going, no, but I did. So if you just want to believe, I
just told you I did. Of course I did.
Just believe me, and then you won't be mad anymore. It's pretty simple.
Yeah.
And we just keep getting more and more angry when they're holding on with both hands to that lie in the face of the, the reality of here's the evidence.
I'm going to show you how I know you didn't brush your teeth.
Right. And what does that do? Exactly what you were saying earlier. It breaks that connection.
Yeah.
So then,
It
you know,
makes me more angry. I can speak for myself, but when I get sucked into that, and I do, I try really hard not to, but some days I'm not my best self and I get sucked into it. My rage, because at that point it's rage, has zero impact on my kid at all. The only impact it has is to push my kid further and further away. They don't care that I'm raging. They don't care that I'm angry. It doesn't matter. And the only person whose day is turned upside down over somebody brushing or not brushing their teeth is me. In our house, it's about wearing socks. My kid will often come downstairs ready to go to school, and I'll say, "Do you have socks on?" And she says, "Yes." And I'm like, I have socks on. So now I just keep socks in my bed table and I just say, "Come sit and I'm gonna put socks on for you." Because I'm just
Right.
not getting into it. 99% of the time she doesn't have socks on. If I ask her, she'll tell me she has socks on. 99% of the time she doesn't. So we just circumvent all that and I just put the socks on when she comes downstairs.
Yep. I think that's great too, that you came up with a solution to that.
Yeah.
So I would tell you one story, my lying as a little kid story, one of the many lying as a little kid stories. But I was like maybe 6, and every morning my mother would make me a bowl of cereal and she'd sit me in front of the TV and I could watch one episode of Josie and the Pussycats while she would go get my lunch ready. And I would take one bite of the cereal. So for a while, I'd take one bite of the cereal and I'd take the bowl and I'd stuff it underneath the rocker recliner, like, you know, like a big rocker recliner.
Yeah.
I'd stuff it under there. And she'd come back in and she'd say, "Did you put your bowl in the sink? It's time to get dressed." I'd say, "Yeah." And we'd go get dressed and go to school. This happened for like a week. And but here was my thought process as a little kid, right? I wasn't hungry in the morning. I didn't want to eat breakfast. I had severe anxiety that, you know, of course, back then nobody called it anxiety, but also it just looked like I was, you know, attention seeking. I was spoiled. I was, you know, being a brat. That's what my anxiety looked like. So in my little mind, I didn't want to eat breakfast because I was scared that I would get sick because I was so anxious. And I would go to school and I would
Right.
throw up, and throwing up would mean death. So my
Yeah.
solution was,
That's social suicide to throw up in school.
well, yeah. So I'd take a bite, I'd stick it under the thing. "Did you put your bowl in the sink?" "Yeah, of course I put my bowl in the sink." "Go get dressed, go to school." A week later, I don't know how, but she found, like, you know, 6 bowls underneath the rocker recliner. And of course, she lost it. She totally lost it. She was like, "This is disgusting. How
Right.
could you waste this food? And why would you lie about this? I'm so disappointed. I can't believe you lied to me. You are more than capable of putting your bowl in the sink." You know, the whole spiel.
Right.
And, you know, that was her point of view. Was like,
Yeah.
she was furious with me. Mine was like, I don't even know what a lie is. I was doing what I needed to do to keep myself safe.
Right.
I was doing what I needed to do the next thing. Like, I couldn't eat breakfast because if I did, I'd feel sick. Then I'd throw a tantrum because I wouldn't want to go to school. Then I would get in trouble for throwing a tantrum. Then I'd get stuffed in the car and brought to school anyway. Then I'd be late for school and the teacher would shame me for being late. And then I'm in the nurse's office because I think I'm going to die. So I was doing what I needed to do. She didn't get that, but I will say she did eventually sit me down and say, "What would you rather have for breakfast?" Which led to me eating a Carnation instant breakfast bar and Tang for the rest of my school career. But you know what? It was fine. It went down.
Yeah. Wasn't the same as soaking wet cereal.
No, exactly. And
That's-
that's like, you know, you figuring out the sock thing, right?
Yep.
So I'll just sit down with you and put the socks on. She was like, "Here's your Tang, go out the door."
Just the fact that you know about Tang makes me smile all over. I feel like that's a forgotten thing.
That's my age showing. Yeah.
So I think we're almost at the place where we're doing Q&A, aren't we?
I think so.
Yeah, we can do that if you all are ready.
Did we miss anything? Do you have anything further? I mean, I feel like we talked round and round. that maybe,
I think the only other thing I wanted to mention was one of the biggest lies, fantasies, stories that adoptees will cling to is the one that they don't care or want to know anything about their birth family. And that's a tough one, because I know a lot of adoptive parents want to help with that, want to be involved with that, and or don't, and depending on which fantasy the adoptee fell into, it can be a really terrifying thing. And even when an adopted person is saying, I don't want to have anything to do with my birth family, they're horrible people, I don't want to know them, I don't want to think about them, that's a lie, because there is a part of them, even if it's not in that moment, might have been in the past, it will be in the future, that's an important part of who they are. And I think the one thing that adoptive parents can do is be grateful when an adoptee shares a little piece of that with them. So, and feel lucky. So I'd say adoptive parents feel grateful and feel lucky when your child can share a little bit of their internal experience, whether it be through fantasy, through saying, sharing like, oh yeah, my biological parents loved me and they had to move to Europe and that's why I came to be with you. Total lie, complete fantasy, but part of what they need for their identity. So just accept it and be grateful that they share that little piece with you. And even if, it goes back and forth, that fantasy might turn into, yeah, my biological parents were, horrible, terrible people, and that's why I came to live with you. Accept that piece too. So I think that unconditional acceptance and that gratitude when they do share a little piece of their internal fantasy and storytelling with you can go a long way for trust.
I love that. Thank you for that, because that was really important to point out. That because I know as an adoptive parent that's a struggle, right? Is especially because I know my kids' birth parents, and sort of navigating that, supporting them in that being their journey, and letting them sort of have it for what it is it's one of those ones that I will continue to struggle with. So thank you for that. I really appreciated that. All right, Samantha, you're on, man.
Okay, so I think these two would be totally fine with you just unmuting and asking your question. Michelle posted I think a comment in the chat about her own daughter. I'll read it out loud. It says, similar to brushing the teeth lie, which happens too. My daughter lies about taking a shower, and I told her I can tell because the washcloth and towels are still dry. And now she just gets them wet and lies about it. Now I have extra wash to do and still not showering. It sounds like real life. If anyone else has a question for these two, feel free to unmute, or if you'd rather type it in the chat, you can read it out loud. Kristen said, we adopted our daughter out of foster care at age 2, and she makes up stories about being pregnant, that she had a sibling that died, and that we abuse her, and shares with other kids on social media. She has been doing it since she was about 7 and is now 13 and still doing so. Any insight?
That's a tough one. I can share that when I was like, I don't know, maybe 9, I had one of my best friends lived across the street from me. I was an only child. I was raised as an only child. And I had her mother convinced that I had an older sister who lived in our attic. And her mother knew my mother. I mean, they were friendly. They talked. But I was so convincing with this lie, with this internal story that I had this older sister. I convinced this grown woman that I had a sister that she had never seen in the 10 years that she had lived there, that lived in our attic. So it sounds as if that fantasy is so strong and so real and so essential to your daughter's identity and core being. She's figuring it out too, right? That might not be what she hangs on to for the rest of her life. But in this moment, that seems to give her something. she's getting something from it, right?
I also think the sort of abuse narrative, especially for kids in care, is a really powerful narrative. It gives them a lot of power and control because often in their lives, making abuse allegations gives them control of their home environment. Kids move because of abuse allegations. It brings new adults in their lives because of adult abuse allegations. So I think, and I think they also know that to some degree as parents, it incites a certain amount of fear in us when abuse allegations are made because it's difficult. So I think maybe reflecting on what is the underlying need, what is going on for her that she feels the need to assert power and control in that way. Where are there areas where you can give her more control over things that are going on in her life? Are there times that she tends to use this lie more often? Does it validate her in some way to be like, excuse my language, but like little orphan Annie, right? Does it perpetuate this abused orphan adoptee narrative that's so pervasive in the media and stuff? So I think trying to figure out what she's getting from that, but I think the abuse narrative is such a common one for kids who come from that place as a way of them gaining control of their environment. It's just something they know works, gets lots of adults in an uproar, it gets them a lot of attention, and it serves a lot of purposes in that way. And again, it's typically a really hot button for us as parents because I don't abuse you. How could you tell someone I abuse you? Because that makes us have really uncomfortable feelings. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's what I got.
Thank you. I was thinking this whole time, doesn't it take it takes a higher level of brain function to be parents, right? To address that fear response with not a fear response, right? It takes us being in a higher level of brain functioning to be able to respond that way. It's difficult and takes a lot of learning. iPhone 80, I don't think that's your real name, but your hand is raised.
Oh, is that what my name is listed as?
Yeah.
My husband's next to me. Is that what it says? He's on it too. So we've got we've got lots of kids, but the one that we're having the most kind of difficulty responding to is our 16-year-old foster son, who's only been with us about a year and a half. So there's a lot that he's fairly new to the family. But and we understand the survival response, and we approach it exactly how you guys said, like, not here's your lie, but like, I know the truth, let's talk about it. But he is so caught up in that survival response that he, even I'll just use last night as an example. There was a point of some semblance of he's on the diving team of how practice worked that we were asking him about, not accusing, not asking if he was lying, and he just starts yelling at us and saying he's not lying, and then he starts lying in there, and we're just trying to understand a little piece of the puzzle that we're missing. And another situation where we have like, okay, you're actually harassing people. Like, here's the evidence. You're actually literally harassing people. Let's talk about it so you understand why you can't do that. And I'm not harassing people. I'm not, like, even when we approach it in the like, we want to help you through this, let's help understand it, the lies double down, and the screaming and the kind of actually violence really starts then. So I don't really know how to approach it any differently. Yeah, is that about covering it? Yeah. Help.
I don't know what you have, Ellen, but for me, my first inclination is when you ask him a question, like especially about, we'll say harassment or something, when you're trying to get him to understand, and I don't know the circumstance around that, is somehow use an I statement. Don't direct it at him, because I find my kids double down and become irrational when they perceive me accusing them of something, even when I'm not. So I'll also often start with, I need to understand, or it's not clear to me when this happens, why it happens. So
yeah, we do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's my first inclination, is that whenever they perceive you as pointing out a failure in them, it tends to escalate. That if somehow you could make it about yourself, and your need for understanding or explanation,
Yep.
that's what
We
I
do
got.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, and maybe if he starts to get accelerated, know that you're pushing some button there, maybe revisit it. Maybe just feel like, you know what, I get it. This might be hard for you to talk about now. Often when there's a topic that I find my kids getting accelerated, I'll send them a text, I'll leave them a note. I find another way to communicate my question or my concern that's less face-to-face, because sometimes that face-to-face interaction they perceive as accusatory, even when it's positive. Looking someone in the eye and having a dialogue can be really, really triggering, can perpetuate lies, because that interaction for them historically has always been negative.
Okay.
So if you can find
And that's
another
something we
way
haven't tried. Mhm.
to communicate, often text, because there's very little emotion in text. There's very little facial expressions that could be misread in text. It can be
Yeah.
very clear. So that's, you know, I would say avoid maybe face-to-face contact, because sometimes that can be really difficult, a difficult way to interact.
Definitely
Ellen,
something we
I don't
haven't tried.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think too that getting to be able to pull out the story that he's telling himself, because I would assume that there's an internal story that he's telling himself. And if anything that you say or even infer is going against that story that he's invested himself in internally, that's going to produce that anger response, or that fear response that looks like anger, right? That tantrum because he can't get what he needs, and on some sort of, you know, very basic level, he needs to stay safe, he needs to stay alive. And so I maybe even too, if you can somehow find out, pull out, discuss what his internal story is without judgment, you know, with just being interested, being curious, and what it is he's telling himself, that might lead to more conversation, and then being able to sit with it. I mean, the anger is scary, especially with teenage boys. I get that, but being able to sit with them through their anger, if there's no violence or physical aggression or anything, can be worth it too, until you can co-regulate with them, because even our big kids need co-regulation, and being able to just sit there with them when they're in that anger state can do a lot for them, confidence wise.
Yeah, sometimes just saying, I can see this is really hard for you to talk about, so I'm just going to chill here. And if you want to talk about it, I'm here. You know, just being present rather than continuing the conversation, but sort of just ending it and creating a safe space, which, you know, is that sort of co-regulating is give up your need for the answer in that moment and just allow him the space to sort of process through why his reaction is that big, what's going on inside him. Because I find teenagers tend to be insightful if they're given the space to pause and think about it. It's when we tend to not give them the space to gain the insight that we perpetuate, and the violence increases and the aggression increases and the loudness increases, because the truth is it works for them, right? It backs you off. When they get loud enough and big enough, you go away, and they've solved
That's exactly
the
what he's trying to do.
Yeah.
Exactly what he's trying to do.
Yeah.
And we recognize it. Yeah. And this is a kid who doesn't have the ability to be insightful. He doesn't have the capabilities, and communication is incredibly difficult in the first place because he's hard of hearing, and it all just compounds.
Yeah. So there's some variables there, it sounds like.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. There's another question from a very different perspective, which is great that we have a lot of different families in this group. This is from Jennifer. I'm going through the adoption process with my 4-year-old who has been in my care since she was 4 weeks old. She only knows me as her mom and my family as her family, but is asking if she has a dad and who or where her dad is with, or what's his name. She's single, this adoptive mom. I don't want to lie to her, but I hear very much what you are saying about fantasizing her story not being good for her in the future. Any recommendations on how to respond to this?
That's a great one. And single parent to single parent, it just makes it a little bit more complicated when we don't have that second person to kind of help us with that piece of it. I don't know. She's 4, and her question might be as simple as, so what's his name? His name's Steve, if you know what his name is. And that could be exactly all she needs right now. She might not be asking, well, who is he and what was his, part in my birth and how does he fit in? But I mean, when we're little, or when they're little, and they ask us one simple question and we get really big with the question and we want to give them like all of this insight and all of this information. And they're literally just like, I just wanted to know his name, and that might be enough for her. It's really, I think, what you're comfortable with at this point, and then just what she needs. You don't have to give her everything right now, but just the fact that if she asks a question and you can answer it honestly, that's going to build the trust. So when she comes back at 10 and says, okay, now what's his last name? Okay, now I want to know more. She's going to be able to trust you. You've already got that relationship and that connection established so that she feels comfortable. Because especially with the single parent stuff, it's a specialness of like you and her, and that's it, right? You and her against the world. She's going to be your person. You're going to be her person. So to keep that relationship open and honest, but only answer the question she's asking. So I don't know if she's getting further into it or if she really is just leaving it at that, but that's kind of where, when I was reading that question, where I went with it.
The only other thing that I have to work on is my face when I say things, because I have some pretty strong feelings about some of my kids' birth parents. So I often will practice like saying their name in the mirror, answering a question like that might come up in the mirror, just to check my facial expressions, because you don't, at 4, you don't want your facial expression to be like, ooh, this conversation makes me very uncomfortable, and they read that on your face and then don't ever ask again, because you want to be the resource for those questions for her. So sometimes I recommend, and I do for myself, I practice these answers and check my facial expression. Like, am I giving you any sort of, and I might accidentally be doing it, but I just have to be mindful of how vibrant my face expressions can be when I'm talking about things that make me uncomfortable, or things that I'm not sure how to answer. So that'd be my only advice, is that if it's a conversation that's hard for you, maybe practice it in the mirror or with someone, so you can make sure that you're still giving them an open, engaged expression. So you're the person they're going to come to for those answers as they grow.
Oh, that is an excellent point, Danielle, because I have the same issue. And I have to make sure that, because I have that expressive face, and then I have a kid who's all about my expressive face. And, I have feelings around their other parents. So definitely a good point. And another good point is, if you're driving, which we know conversations like to happen in the car, and your kid is in the back seat, don't forget that there's a possibility that your rear view mirror might be showing your facial expression. So you might think you're A-okay and have a great tone of voice in whatever conversation you're having. But if you're making those faces, they might be able to see it from the back seat. And that got me a couple of times. So also be careful, rear view mirror.
I really appreciate all of that. And yes, we were driving. And I have that additional rear view mirror so I can see her. So twice the fun. But yeah, I really appreciated what you were sharing, especially earlier, about being someone who is adopted and how it's fantasized, because I don't have a lot of the friends that I have that are adopting. We all went through foster care certification together. We're kind of all in the same. So nobody's like ahead of our game to be like, hey, saying like we loved you more and they loved you so much isn't the better option. Especially for when they're older. And my daughter she started asking who her dad was, and then it dropped. Like, oh, she asked if she had a dad, and then it dropped for a while. And then she one day was like, who's my dad? And there was a follow-up question, what's his name? And I was like, oh gosh. Nobody prepares you for follow-ups when you have a 4-year-old. So I do appreciate all of those things. And I think it's a great recommendation because my poker face is not super great. Not great at all. So thank you so much. I really enjoyed everything you guys had to say. I feel like this is a tremendous help for especially a single parent who's going through this for the first time. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Awesome. We don't talk about nonverbal communication as much as we should, right? Brain science tells us it's the first thing that fear picks up on, right? The other person's nonverbal communication. So even if we're addressing behaviors, that's the first thing that makes our kids feel safe or unsafe. Okay, we got a flood and we have 12 minutes. Chester. Know it's coming, be ready. Practice, never set yourself up to be shown a liar. Future, a little white lie today is a big lie tomorrow. Okay, Renee asked, I'm parenting a child who hoards, another extreme behavior. Can you speak to the whys behind this behavior, as well as how I should parent around this issue?
I have
And Danielle and Ellen, you could see there's another question about stealing there
Yeah.
too.
I have a food hoarder. I don't really have a great answer other than we have food that she's just allowed to have, and we clean her room pretty regularly, and we always engage her in that, and it's just part of our routine because we haven't really found a solution for it. So we make sure there's lots of things that we're okay with her eating as much as she wants available to her, and we just we'll make regular clean outs of her room. We move furniture, and it's usually something we do together. I'm like, come on, clean our room. It's never shame-based. It's just something we do practically. I don't ever point out that we can have bugs or that this is gross, or it's just part of our day. And that's how we clean her room because that's what she needs. I don't know if that's the right answer, but that's what works for us at home. Because it's just a battle we've chosen not to take on at this point.
Yeah, I haven't had to deal with hoarding as far as my kids go. The only hoarding, my mother's a hoarder. I know with her, it's around control, and she has adult onset ADHD and OCD. And so that's where it's coming from. Also, that she has a big fear of death. And so I think all of that is where it comes from. With my kids, I shouldn't say that. They have hoarded things, their toys, those things, those material things. And that bothered me because I'm not that way. I always want to get rid of and let other people reuse and stuff. So the food part, no. But yeah, I don't have a good one for that one because I haven't dealt with it myself personally, and it seems like an awful tough one.
And I think everything you guys were talking about with lying applies, right? In terms of the posture of the parent, seeing the behavior as communication of some kind of need, applies to all of these behaviors, I think. Let's see, Kristen, feel free to unmute also. And
I just have to tell
talk
you
more
that
about your
I appreciate that they say to lock something up. That is just a button for me. So I'm going to qualify that ahead of time personally, because I feel like the minute you lock something up, you make it more tempting and more desirable because now you've made it precious. And for anybody, I know Samantha's going to give like the stuff that's coming up, but any of you who are going to join Empower to Connect, there's one of my favorite people who speak on there. She talks about yes foods and having yes in the bank. So, you know, that's kind of where I got the idea of just having, we have a thing on our counter that has Cliff Bars. They're foods that my kid can eat as much of it as she wants. We never make food a battle in our house. We never have a conversation about it. There's an infinite amount of fruit. And I just think, yeah, I don't, locking to me actually perpetuates it, in my opinion. I think because then you're saying this is off limits. So whenever something's off limits, that's what I want more of.
Yeah, we resisted for a long time doing that. But then it just got to the point where everything was wiped out. I mean, we could have oh, you can have it all, and it's gone literally the next day. But it's interesting because like for my husband and I, it's kind of been nice because all the candy's in this cabinet and it helps us to not get into it. So we've made it more of kind of a family thing. It's not just, oh, you know, it's just you. It's, oh, this is actually benefiting us all. And that was really the only way psychologically that I could actually fathom doing it. And the same thing we're starting to do with any alcohol that we have around, things like that, because as teenagers, you know, it just comes to that. But the goal is that I would like her to be able to self-regulate, just like we all would like to be able to perfectly self-regulate, and we can't. And the trauma at the table sounds like a really good thing. Is there a recording of the trauma at the table that's mentioned here?
Yes, there's a link there. Renee put the link there to our network, and you can just search for that.
Great. Thank you so much.
If I could sneak in here just for a second. So I just want to say sometimes we have to remember that the fact that we want to know the why is the judgment. So, I mean, there are therapists, there's all kinds of folks who can figure out the why and the this and the that. Well, we need to figure out a strategies to live with. And you addressed the whole bunch of them right there, that they don't go shopping and bring the stuff in, we do. So one way to control it is to not have enough for anybody to hoard, you know? But I mean, it's when we get hung up on the why did they do that? Why did they do that? That can't help but come out as judgment. And then because ultimately it doesn't matter. We don't have to know the why. We have to hopefully find somebody who can direct us to the why, so then we can address our reaction, our response to it based on that real information. But I don't believe that as a parent, I need to know why everything is going. Because the minute I go down that block, then I have a cure for it. And my cure is always going to be destructive to the relationship instead of positive. So just wanted to throw that out.
Thanks, Chester.
Thank you for that. And I did the same thing with alcohol when we started fostering teens, and when our kids became teens, we just didn't have alcohol in the house. We just didn't, because it was just easier. It was easier than having that battle. Like I used to tease my husband because he doesn't drink a lot, but every once in a while he'd want to have a beer after work. He'd like stop at 7-Eleven and buy like a hobo beer. And I'd be like, here you go with your hobo beer. And I'm like, if you don't finish it, I'm dumping it out. He could have one. So he has hobo beer and that was it. And that's just how we worked. And now our kids are way past that. Most of them are drinking age, and it just is our norm. We never have alcohol, and if we have a party, we tell people to bring their own and be prepared to bring it home with them. It's just how we've adjusted our lives. So I think speaking to what Chester said about sometimes the why and just figuring out what works for you to live with whatever the circumstances, because it just becomes your new normal.
I love that example, Danielle, because to me that says this is my responsibility as the parent. I'm putting this on myself. I understand that my child doesn't have the skills to regulate in this area or to meet their own need in this area. And I'm going to figure out a way to co-regulate, to help them to figure out how to meet this need. Okay, we can keep talking about this for a long time, but I want to leave you with some resources to continue this conversation, because I know There's so many other questions around it. And thank you so much, Danielle and Ellen, for your educated perspectives. So there's a couple things I'm going to put in the chat. The first is here at the Coalition, our Agape program is for parents who have adopted children or have guardianship over their children. If you're not an Agape family and would like to be, we provide one-on-one support, training, referrals, advocacy. It's that bottom link there to become an Agape family. If any of this is interesting to you and might be new information to you, our Reframing Parenting series, we go through brain-based behaviors, we go through why our kids do the things that we do and more specific therapeutic parenting approaches. The virtual starts March 1st of that Reframing Parenting, and there's also an in-person option for those of you who are in, is it Cortland? Is that where it is? Central New York, Cortland area, I think. So you can see the link to sign up for that. And as Danielle said, there's a Trust-Based Relational Intervention Conference coming up April 29th. It's an all-day virtual conference, and it teaches therapeutic parenting, in short. Danielle also is a leader of a support group, a parent education group on Saturday mornings. So there's a link for that as well. I think that about covers it. Thank you all so much for coming, and we hope